The glow of the VR headset cast an eerie light on Ethan's face as he sat hunched over in his gaming chair, completely absorbed in a world Claire couldn't see. It was almost midnight, and the faint hum of the machine was the only sound in their otherwise silent apartment. Claire leaned against the doorway, her arms crossed, watching him with a mix of frustration and longing. "Ethan," she said, her voice cutting through the quiet. He didn't flinch. "Ethan," she repeated, louder this time. Ethan pulled off the headset with an annoyed grunt. "What? I'm in the middle of something." Claire stepped forward, her eyes narrowing. "In the middle of what exactly? Because it's not our conversation from earlier. You've been in there all night." He glanced at the clock on the desk and sighed. "I told you, this game is a big deal. It's not just mindless shooting or whatever you think it is. There's strategy, alliances. It's immersive." "I get that," Claire shot back, "but maybe you should immerse yourself in your marriage for a change. We were supposed to have dinner together tonight. Remember that?" Ethan looked genuinely puzzled for a moment, then groaned as realization hit. "Was that tonight? Claire, I'm sorry. It completely slipped my mind. I'll make it up to you, I promise." "Promises don't mean much when you keep breaking them," Claire said, her voice quieter now, but no less sharp. "What's so special about this game anyway? Why does it deserve more of your time than I do?" Ethan hesitated, running a hand through his hair. "It's hard to explain. When I'm in Endless Horizons, it's like I can be someone else, someone who isn't stuck in spreadsheets and deadlines all day." "And who is this someone else?" Claire asked, her tone icy. "A knight in shining armor saving damsels in distress?" Ethan chuckled awkwardly, sensing the tension but unsure how to diffuse it. "Something like that. Look, I'll log off now. We can talk, okay?" But Claire shook her head. "Not tonight. I'm going to bed." As she turned to leave, Ethan reached for her arm. "Claire, wait. I really am sorry. This game, it's just a phase. It doesn't mean anything." Claire pulled away, her voice tinged with hurt. "I wish I believed that." Later that night, Claire lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The soft glow from the office down the hall told her Ethan hadn't followed through on his promise to log off. Her mind raced with questions. Why was he so drawn to this game? Was it really just a harmless escape? Or was there something, or someone, keeping him there? Ethan, meanwhile, was deep into Endless Horizons. His avatar, Aiden, stood tall and imposing in gleaming silver armor, the polar opposite of his real-life self. Beside him, a woman's avatar, Celine, stood cloaked in shimmering blue, her staff glowing faintly in the moonlight. "That was impressive, Aiden," Celine said, her voice smooth and melodic. "You handled those raiders like a true leader." "It's all about timing," Aiden replied, his tone confident but not cocky. "But I couldn't have done it without you casting those barriers. You saved my life. Again." Celine laughed softly. "Well, what are allies for? You're the only one I trust in this world, Aiden. Everyone else has their own agenda." Ethan couldn't help but smile at the compliment, even though it was just a game. Celine had been his in-game partner for weeks now, and their chemistry was undeniable. Conversations with her felt easy, natural, something he hadn't felt with Claire in a long time. Here, in this world, he could be someone better, someone worthy. "You know," Celine continued, "I've never met anyone quite like you. Most players are so focused on loot and points, but you're different." "Coming from you, that means a lot," Aiden replied. "You're the most skilled player I've seen in this game, and probably the smartest." Celine tilted her head, her avatar's expression unreadable. "Flattery will get you everywhere, Aiden. But tell me something real. What's your story?" Ethan hesitated. In the game, he rarely talked about his real life. It was part of the appeal. But with Celine, he felt a strange urge to open up. "Not much to tell," he said finally. "Just a guy trying to find a little adventure in a boring life." "Boring?" Celine echoed. "I don't believe that for a second. Someone like you couldn't be boring." Ethan chuckled. "Trust me, you'd be surprised." The next morning, Claire stood in the kitchen, sipping coffee and scrolling through her phone. Her feed was filled with posts from friends, vacation photos, date nights, new babies. She felt a pang of envy, wondering when her own life had become so monotonous. Ethan walked in, looking disheveled but cheerful. "Morning," he said, grabbing a mug. Claire didn't look up. "Morning." He hesitated, then added, "About last night, I know I messed up. I'll make it up to you, okay? Maybe dinner tonight?" "Maybe," Claire replied flatly. She didn't want to fight again, but she wasn't ready to forgive him either. Ethan sighed. Come on, Claire, don't be like this. I'm trying. Trying? She finally looked at him, her eyes tired but fierce. Ethan, you've been trying for months now. When does it stop being an excuse? I'm doing the best I can, he said defensively. Are you? Claire countered. Because it feels like the best you can do is escape into some fantasy world where none of this, she gestured around the kitchen, at their life, exists. Ethan didn't reply. Instead, he drained his coffee and left the room, muttering, I don't have time for this. As the days passed, Ethan's time in Endless Horizons only increased, and Claire's patience wore thinner. One evening, while cleaning the office, she noticed a small notebook on Ethan's desk. Curiosity got the better of her, and she opened it. Inside were detailed notes about Endless Horizons, quests, strategies, maps. But what caught her eye was a page filled with scribbles about Celine. Phrases like trustworthy, smart, and beautiful voice leapt off the page, making her stomach churn. Who was this Celine? And why did Ethan care so much about her? That night, as Ethan logged into the game, Claire made a decision. She wasn't going to sit idly by while her marriage crumbled. If this game was taking Ethan away from her, then she would meet him there, on his turf. After Ethan fell asleep, Claire downloaded Endless Horizons onto her laptop and created an account. She spent hours designing her avatar, Kira, and learning the basics of the game. By the time she logged out, dawn was breaking, and her determination was stronger than ever. If he won't tell me what's going on, she thought, I'll find out myself. Claire hesitated before slipping the VR headset over her head. She adjusted the straps, feeling the weight of her decision settle on her shoulders. This wasn't just a game anymore. It was her marriage at stake. She took a deep breath and pressed the power button, letting the world around her fade as Endless Horizons booted up. The transition was seamless, and soon she stood in a breathtakingly vivid world. Her avatar, Kira, looked back at her from a rippling pond, her rogue's leather armor gleaming under a bright sun. Claire had chosen a stealthy, agile appearance, far from the person she felt like in real life. Here goes nothing, she muttered, stepping into the game's sprawling landscape. The world of Endless Horizons was a marvel of design. Towering mountains framed lush forests, and villages buzzed with NPCs and players alike. Claire wandered through the crowded market square, trying to make sense of the chaotic activity. Merchants shouted about rare potions, warriors compared weapons, and mages argued over the best spells for raids. She opened her player map and scanned the glowing markers. Ethan, or rather his avatar, Aiden, was somewhere to the east in a place called the Whispering Glade. It was a secluded area, far from the main hubs. The name itself felt ominous. Kira, a voice interrupted her thoughts, and Claire froze. She turned to see a tall, roguish player in a green cloak standing behind her. His username, Marcus Rogue, hovered above his head. You're new here, aren't you? Marcus asked, his tone casual but his piercing gaze making her uncomfortable. Lost, maybe? I'm fine, Claire replied, keeping her voice neutral. She wasn't here to make friends. Fine, huh? Marcus smirked, leaning against a post. Well, you're in for a rough time if you don't know the ropes. This world can be unforgiving. Claire narrowed her eyes. I'll manage. Marcus chuckled. Suit yourself. But if you change your mind, look me up. I know all the shortcuts. Before she could respond, he disappeared into the crowd, leaving Claire with a strange sense of unease. Shaking it off, she refocused on her goal and set off toward the Whispering Glade. The glade was every bit as enchanting as the name suggested. Fireflies dotted the air, and the faint sound of water trickling over rocks added to the serene ambience. Claire crouched behind a tree, scanning the area. It didn't take long to spot Aiden and Celine standing by a glowing fountain. Celine's avatar was even more striking up close. Her robes shimmered with an iridescent light, and her staff pulsed with an otherworldly energy. The way she stood, confident, poised, made Claire's stomach twist with a mixture of jealousy and anger. She activated her avatar's stealth ability, turning nearly invisible as she crept closer. I can't believe we pulled it off, Aiden said, his tone filled with admiration. That last ambush was brutal. Celine laughed, the sound light and melodic. You give me too much credit. You were the one who took down the leader. Only because you had my back, Aiden replied. I don't think I've ever had a partner like you in any game. Claire's jaw tightened as she listened. Partner, he'd said, as if they were equals in some grand adventure. When was the last time Ethan had spoken about her with such reverence? Celine tilted her head, her avatar's glowing eyes narrowing. It's easy to trust someone who understands you. This world is our escape, isn't it? Aiden hesitated before answering. Yeah, it's the only place I can really be myself. And who are you, really? Celine asked, her voice softer now. Not Aiden, the warrior, the real you. Claire's breath caught. Ethan never shared things like this, not with her, at least. I don't know, Aiden admitted, just a guy trying to find some meaning. Celine stepped closer, her hand brushing his armored gauntlet. Then maybe you're looking in the wrong places. Claire's vision blurred with anger. She wanted to scream at Ethan, to drag him out of this virtual fantasy and back into reality. But instead, she forced herself to stay calm. There had to be more to this, and she wasn't leaving until she found out. Later that night, Claire logged off, her mind racing. She couldn't stop replaying their conversation. Who was Celine? Was she just another player, or was there something more sinister at play? Claire decided she needed an ally, someone who knew the game better than she did. Reluctantly, she sent a message to Marcus Rogue. Didn't take you long to come around, Marcus said with a sly grin as they met in a dimly lit tavern. Don't read too much into it, Claire replied, crossing her arms. I need information. Marcus raised an eyebrow. Information's expensive in this world. Claire sighed, already regretting her decision. What do you want? He leaned back in his chair, studying her. Let's start with a simple trade. You tell me why someone like you is playing this game, and I'll point you in the right direction. Claire hesitated. She couldn't tell him the truth, not yet. I'm here for a friend. They got me into it. Uh-huh. Marcus didn't look convinced. Well, since I'm feeling generous, I'll give you this for free. Trust no one, especially not anyone too good to be true. What do you mean? Claire asked, leaning forward. Players like you are easy targets, Marcus explained. You're new, inexperienced, and probably here for all the wrong reasons. People like Celine, they'll chew you up and spit you out. Claire's blood ran cold. What do you know about Celine? Marcus smirked. A lot more than I think you do. Tell me, Claire demanded. Marcus shook his head. Not so fast. You'll owe me for that one, Kiera. Big time. Over the next few days, Claire spent more time in the game, carefully inserting herself into Aiden and Celine's world. She joined their quests, pretending to be just another player eager to help. Celine seemed wary at first, but eventually accepted Kiera into their circle. You're good, Celine said one night after a particularly grueling mission. Almost too good for a newbie. Beginner's luck, Claire replied casually, though her heart pounded in her chest. Aiden, oblivious to the tension between the two women, laughed. Kiera's a quick learner. She saved my ass more than once tonight. Celine's smile didn't reach her eyes. Maybe, but this world has a way of revealing people's true intentions. Claire met Celine's gaze, her own expression unreadable. Doesn't every world? In the real world, Claire struggled to balance her double life. She stayed up late playing the game, piecing together clues about Celine's true identity, only to wake up exhausted for work. Ethan, oblivious to her investigation, grew even more distant. One evening, Claire returned to the Whispering Glade alone, determined to find evidence that would expose Celine. What she found instead was far worse. A series of private messages between Aiden and Celine hidden within the game's chat logs. The messages were flirtatious, intimate, too intimate. Claire's hands shook as she read them. This wasn't just a game anymore. Whatever Ethan had with Celine, it was crossing a line, and Claire wasn't sure she could pull him back. But one thing was certain, she wasn't giving up. Not yet. Claire's hands hovered over her keyboard as she prepared to log back into endless horizons. The private messages she had discovered between Ethan and Celine were burned into her memory. Every flirtatious remark, every compliment, felt like a knife in her chest. She wasn't sure if this was an emotional affair, a manipulation, or something else entirely. But she knew one thing. Celine wasn't who she appeared to be. Claire's instincts screamed that there was more to this mysterious sorceress, and she was determined to uncover the truth. The familiar glow of the game's world enveloped her as Kiera materialized in the bustling city square. Her resolve was steel, but her heart raced as she checked the map. Aiden and Celine were together again, this time in a region called the Veiled Spire. Perfect, Claire muttered under her breath. If there was ever a place for secrets, It sounded like this would be it. The veiled spire was shrouded in mist, its dark spires piercing the sky like ominous daggers. The eerie silence was broken only by the occasional screech of distant creatures. Kira moved carefully, her stealth ability activated as she approached a clearing where Adon and Celine stood locked in conversation. "You've been distracted lately," Celine said, her tone laced with suspicion. Her avatar's glowing eyes flickered, and Claire could almost feel the weight of her stare through the screen. "Just real-life stuff," Aiden replied casually, though his voice lacked conviction. "Work's been crazy." Celine tilted her head. "You're not a good liar, Aiden. Is it work, or is it something, or someone else?" Aiden hesitated, then chuckled nervously. "Come on, Celine. You know you're the only one I trust in here." "Good," Celine replied, her voice soft but firm. "Because trust is everything in this world. Lose it, and you lose everything." Kira's grip tightened on her daggers as she watched. It was one thing to suspect Celine was manipulating Ethan, but hearing it confirmed in real time sent a surge of anger through her. Suddenly, Celine turned her head, scanning the mist. "We're not alone." Claire froze, her stealth ability rendering her nearly invisible, but Celine's intuition was uncanny. She held her breath as Celine's glowing eyes scanned the area. "Probably just a rogue monster." Aiden said dismissively, "You're always so paranoid." "Paranoia is a survival skill," Celine replied, though she eventually turned her attention back to him. "You should try it sometime." Claire logged out a few hours later, her mind swirling. Celine's control over Ethan was stronger than she'd realized. But who was Celine really? And how did she know so much about Ethan's personal life? Her answer came sooner than she expected. The next evening, Marcus sent her an in-game message. "We need to talk. I've got something you'll want to see." They met in a hidden cavern near the game's coastline, far from the prying eyes of other players. The flickering light from glowing mushrooms cast eerie shadows on the walls as Marcus leaned casually against a boulder, his green cloak blending into the darkness. "You've been busy," Marcus said, his tone playful but his eyes serious. "Following Celine around like a shadow. Careful, or she'll notice." "I don't care if she notices," Claire snapped. "I need answers." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Fair enough, but you're not going to like what I found." He opened a menu and sent her a file. It was a screenshot of a message log, a private conversation between Celine and another player. As Claire read the messages, her blood turned to ice. "Celine, the knight is almost ready. He's shared enough for phase 2. Good. Extract what we need and cut him loose. These types always get too clingy." "Understood, but he's different. It might take longer." "Stick to the plan. No attachments." "What the hell is this?" Claire demanded, her voice shaking with anger. Marcus shrugged. "Celine's real game. She's part of a group that targets players like your knight. They build trust, dig for personal information, and then use it for less than honest purposes." Claire's fists clenched. "So she's a scammer?" "More or less," Marcus said, his tone unusually somber. "And she's good at it. This isn't her first rodeo." "How do you know all this?" Claire asked, narrowing her eyes. "Let's just say I've been around," Marcus replied cryptically. "I've seen people lose a lot more than time to Celine and her crew." Claire's mind raced as she processed this new information. Ethan wasn't just being unfaithful. He was being exploited. And Celine wasn't just some random gamer. She was a predator. "Why are you helping me?" Claire asked suddenly, her suspicion growing. Marcus smiled faintly. "Let's just say I have a soft spot for people who fight back, and you don't seem like the type to roll over." Claire nodded slowly. "I'm not, and I'm going to stop her." Marcus's grin widened. "Now you're speaking my language. But if you're serious, you'll need more than guts. You'll need proof." That night, Claire followed Marcus's advice and began digging into Celine's digital footprint. She used every tool at her disposal, both in and out of the game, to uncover the truth. What she found was chilling. Celine wasn't just a player. She was a shadow, her real identity hidden behind layers of proxies and fake accounts. Her entire presence in the game was designed for one purpose: to deceive. As Claire pieced together the fragments of Celine's schemes, she realized the full extent of the danger Ethan was in. Celine wasn't just after his money or information. She was systematically dismantling his sense of reality, replacing it with her own twisted version of trust and dependence. The next time Claire logged in, she confronted Celine directly. "I know what you're doing," Kira said, stepping out of the shadows. Celine turned, her glowing eyes narrowing. "Kira, to what do I owe this unexpected visit?" "Cut the act." Claire snapped. "I know about Nightshade. I know about your little operation, and I'm not going to let you hurt him." Celine laughed, the sound cold and mocking. "Hurt him? Oh, sweet Kira, you have no idea what you're talking about." "Don't I?" Claire countered, stepping closer. "You're a fraud, and I'm going to expose you." Celine's smile faded, replaced by a dangerous glint in her eyes. "You're playing a dangerous game, little rogue. Be careful where you tread. You might not like what you find." As Claire logged out that night, her heart pounded with a mix of fear and determination. Celine was onto her now, but she didn't care. This wasn't just about saving Ethan anymore. It was about taking back control of her life, and she wasn't going to stop until the truth came to light. Claire sat at the kitchen table, staring at her untouched cup of coffee. The late-night confrontations with Celine in Endless Horizons had left her rattled, but the knowledge of Ethan's vulnerability and her discovery of Celine's schemes fueled her resolve. She couldn't tell Ethan what she knew, not yet. He was too entangled in Celine's web to see the truth for himself. Ethan walked into the kitchen, pulling her out of her thoughts. "Morning," he muttered, reaching for the coffee pot. Claire watched him silently, noting the dark circles under his eyes. He'd been up late again. She wondered if it was work or Celine that had kept him glued to his screen. "You're barely sleeping anymore," she said finally, her tone calm but probing. Ethan shrugged, avoiding her gaze. "Work's been intense." "Right," Claire replied, unable to hide the edge in her voice. "Work." Ethan frowned, setting down his mug. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means you've been using work as an excuse for everything lately," Claire shot back. "But I'm not stupid, Ethan. I know there's more to it." Ethan stiffened, his defenses going up. "If you have something to say, just say it." Claire held his gaze, debating whether to confront him then and there. But she decided against it. She needed more proof, something undeniable. Instead, she stood and grabbed her bag. "I'm going out. Don't wait up." Back in Endless Horizons, Claire found herself in a new, darker region of the map, the Obsidian Wastes. This area was known for its treacherous terrain and unpredictable enemies, but she had learned through Marcus that Celine often met her associates here. "Careful, Kira." Marcus's voice crackled through the in-game chat as they crept through the shadows. "These guys don't play fair." "I don't either," Claire replied, her voice steady. She had equipped Kira with the best stealth gear she could afford, but her nerves were on edge. "Just keep watch. I'll handle the rest." As they approached a crumbling fortress, Claire spotted Celine standing in the courtyard. Beside her was another player, a hulking warrior with the username Nightshade. They were deep in conversation, their voices carrying faintly on the wind. "I've extracted enough from him," Celine was saying. "It's time to move on." Nightshade crossed his arms. "You're sure? He's still feeding us useful information." Celine shook her head. "He's too attached now. If we push any further, he'll get suspicious. I'll sever the connection after the next mission." Claire's breath caught. They were talking about Ethan. Marcus's voice broke the tension. "Got what you need?" Claire gritted her teeth. "Not yet." She moved closer, her stealth meter dipping dangerously low. As she crept into range, she activated her recording feature, capturing every word. "Let me handle the breakup," Celine continued. "I'll make it seem like his choice. It's cleaner that way." Nightshade laughed. "You've got a real talent for this." Celine smirked. "Flattery won't get you a bigger cut, Nightshade." Claire's hands tightened around her controller. She had seen enough. But as she began to back away, her stealth meter flashed red. She'd been detected. "Who's there?" Celine snapped, her staff glowing as she scanned the shadows. Marcus's voice rang out in panic. "Kira, get out of there!" But it was too late. Celine's spell hit Kira, disabling her invisibility. Claire's avatar stumbled into view, and Celine's eyes widened in recognition. "Well, well," Celine said, her voice dripping with malice. "If it isn't our little rogue." Nightshade stepped forward, his weapon drawn. "What do we do with her?" Celine tilted her head, studying Claire with cold amusement. "Let her go. She's harmless." Nightshade frowned. "Are you sure?" Celine nodded. "She's just a jealous wife playing detective. She doesn't have the guts to do anything real." Claire's face burned with anger, but she forced herself to retreat. Fighting them now would only end in failure. As she ran, Celine's voice echoed behind her. "Tell Aiden I said hello." Later that night, Claire confronted Marcus in the safety of the game's main hub. "She knows who I am," Claire said, pacing back and forth. "She called me out like I was nothing." Marcus leaned against a railing, watching her with a mix of concern and admiration. "You're lucky she didn't fry you on the spot. Celine's not someone you mess with lightly." "I'm not scared of her," Claire snapped. "I'm scared of losing Ethan." Marcus's expression softened. "Then we need to act fast. If she's planning to cut him loose, it means she's already gotten what she wanted. We have to show him the truth before it's too late." Claire nodded, her determination renewed. "How?" Marcus grinned. "By beating her at her own game." The next day, Claire waited for Ethan to leave for work before logging into his computer. She knew it was a breach of trust, but she didn't care anymore. She needed to see the extent of Celine's influence over him. What she found was worse than she'd imagined. Private messages between Aiden and Celine revealed a deep emotional connection. Ethan confided in Celine about his insecurities, his struggles at work, and even his doubts about his marriage. One message stood out. "Aiden, sometimes I feel like I'm failing in real life, but with you, I feel like I matter." Claire's heart broke as she read the words. This wasn't just a game to Ethan, it was an escape from the person he thought he'd become, and Celine had exploited that vulnerability perfectly. Back in Endless Horizons, Claire and Marcus prepared their counterattack. Their plan was risky but necessary: infiltrate Celine's group and expose her schemes to Ethan in real time. To do that, they needed undeniable proof of her betrayal. Claire approached Aiden during one of his solo quests, pretending to stumble upon him by accident. "Kira," Aiden said, surprised. "What are you doing here?" "Exploring," Claire replied with a casual smile. "This game has so much to offer." Aiden laughed. "You've come a long way since you first joined. I'm impressed." Claire felt a pang of sadness. This was Ethan, the man she fell in love with, kind, supportive, and earnest. She wanted to save him, but she couldn't do it alone. "Actually," Claire said, her tone turning serious, "I need your help. There's something I've been looking into, and it's complicated." Aiden frowned. "What is it?" Claire hesitated, then decided to plant the seed. "I think someone in the game is hiding something dangerous." Aiden's expression darkened. "What kind of something?" "I'll explain later," Claire said, glancing around as if checking for eavesdroppers. "Just trust me." That night, Claire and Marcus executed their plan. They intercepted Celine during a private meeting with Nightshade, this time with a full party of allies to back them up. "What is this?" Celine demanded as Kira and Marcus stepped into view. "This is the end of your game," Claire said, her voice steady. "We know everything." Celine's eyes narrowed. "You don't know who you're dealing with." "No," Claire replied, stepping closer. "You don't." For the first time, Celine looked genuinely unnerved. It wasn't over yet, but Claire felt a glimmer of hope. This time, she was the one holding the cards, and she wasn't going to fold. The night air in the game's Eclipse Citadel was electric, the faint glow of torches casting long shadows on the cobblestone streets. Claire's heart raced as she logged into Endless Horizons, her avatar, Kira, materializing in the Citadel's bustling central square. Tonight was the night she and Marcus would confront Celine with their proof and reveal the truth to Ethan. But the risks were higher than ever. Celine wasn't just a manipulative player. She was dangerous, and Claire couldn't afford to underestimate her. The plan was simple in theory, but fraught with risk. Claire and Marcus had spent the last few days collecting incriminating evidence against Celine, gathering chat logs, transaction histories, and even recordings of her interactions with other players. The key was presenting this to Ethan in a way that would force him to see the truth without shutting down or withdrawing further into Celine's web. "You ready for this?" Marcus's voice crackled through her headset as his avatar appeared beside her. "No," Claire admitted, her grip tightening on her virtual daggers. "But we don't have a choice." Marcus gave her a small smile. "Good answer." The first part of their plan was already in motion. Claire had arranged to meet Ethan, Aiden, in the Citadel under the guise of needing his help for a high-level quest. Celine, as expected, was wary of Claire's increasing presence in their circle and insisted on tagging along. The three avatars stood in the shadow of the citadel's imposing gates, their surroundings alive with the chatter of NPCs and other players. Aiden adjusted his shield, glancing between the two women. "This quest is no joke," he said, trying to lighten the mood. "You sure you're up for it, Kira?" Claire forced a smile. "I've handled worse." Celine's glowing eyes lingered on Claire, her expression unreadable. "I hope you're not biting off more than you can chew." The tension crackled between them, but before it could escalate, Marcus appeared, his cloak billowing dramatically as he stepped into the group. "Hope I'm not late to the party," Marcus said, his tone deliberately casual. He nodded at Aiden before turning to Celine. "And you must be the infamous sorceress." Celine's lips curled into a faint smile, but her voice was cold. "And you are?" "Just a rogue with a knack for being in the right place at the right time," Marcus replied smoothly. "Shall we?" The group made their way through the Citadel, the quest unfolding as a series of increasingly challenging tasks that forced them to rely on one another. Celine's spells were precise, her strategy flawless. Aiden was as dependable as ever, his shield absorbing devastating blows to protect the group. Claire and Marcus worked together seamlessly, their movements synchronized in a way that surprised even Claire. But as the quest reached its climax, a confrontation with a massive flame-spewing dragon, the real battle began. As the dragon's health bar dwindled, Celine turned to Aiden, her voice urgent. "We need to flank it, Aiden with me." "Wait," Claire interjected. "That's not the right move." "I wasn't asking you," Celine snapped, her calm facade slipping for the first time. "Aiden, trust me." Aiden hesitated, glancing between the two women. "Celine, I don't think." "Do it," Celine demanded, her tone sharper than Claire had ever heard it. But before Aiden could respond, Marcus sprang into action. "Enough of this," he shouted, his daggers flashing as he landed the final blow on the dragon. The beast let out a deafening roar before collapsing, its massive body disintegrating into golden particles. The group stood in stunned silence as the game's victory music played, the quest complete. Celine turned on Marcus, her eyes blazing. "What the hell was that?" Marcus smirked. "Just doing my job." The confrontation erupted moments later as Claire seized the opportunity to unveil their evidence. "Aiden," Claire began, her voice steady despite the storm brewing between them. "There's something you need to see." "What is this about?" Aiden asked, his tone wary. "It's about Celine," Claire said, her words cutting through the air like a blade. "She's not who you think she is." Celine's laugh was sharp and cold. "Oh, here we go. The jealous wife routine. How original." "This isn't jealousy," Claire shot back, opening her inventory and pulling up the incriminating files. "This is proof." One by one, Claire displayed the screenshots and recordings for Aiden. The private conversations between Celine and Nightshade, the logs detailing how Celine had manipulated other players, the transactions that showed her profiting from their deception. Aiden's avatar stood frozen, his shield lowered. "Celine, is this true?" Celine's glowing eyes narrowed. "Aiden, don't listen to her. This is a setup." "It's not," Marcus interjected, stepping forward. "I've seen her do this before. She preys on players like you, people who are kind, trusting. She gets what she wants and then moves on." "Enough!" Celine's voice cracked like a whip. "This is absurd. Aiden, you know me. You know who I am." Aiden's hesitation was palpable. I thought I did." Claire stepped closer, her voice softer now. "Ethan, she's been lying to you. Everything she said, everything you felt, it was all a game to her." For a moment, the only sound was the faint hum of the game's background music. "Is it true?" Aiden finally asked, his voice breaking. "Celine, tell me the truth." Celine's avatar turned away, the confident sorceress suddenly looking small and fragile. "What difference does it make?" she said quietly. "You're just another player." The words hung in the air like a death knell. Aiden's avatar staggered backward as if physically struck. After Celine logged out, her presence vanishing like a ghost, the remaining trio stood in silence. "I'm sorry," Claire said, her voice trembling. "I didn't want you to find out this way, but you had to know." Aiden turned to her, his expression a mix of anger, betrayal, and gratitude. "How long have you known?" "A while," Claire admitted. "I didn't tell you sooner because I wasn't sure how to make you see." Aiden nodded slowly, the weight of the truth settling over him. "Thank you," he said finally, "for not giving up on me." Later that night, as Claire sat in the quiet of their living room, Ethan emerged from his office. His face was pale, his eyes red. "Claire," he said, his voice raw, "I don't know how to fix this." Claire looked up at him, her own emotions bubbling to the surface. "We start by talking," she said softly, "about everything." Ethan nodded, a flicker of hope in his eyes. "Okay, let's talk." And for the first time in months, they did. Ethan sat in his office, staring at the VR headset on the desk. The device that had once felt like his lifeline now seemed alien, almost threatening. His mind replayed Celine's final words in Endless Horizons. "You're just another player." He felt like a fool. Everything he'd shared with her, the trust, the emotions, had been used against him. And yet, what hurt more was the realization of what his obsession had cost him. Claire. Their marriage had become collateral damage in his escape into a virtual world. In the living room, Claire sat on the couch, scrolling through her phone, her expression unreadable. Ethan hesitated in the doorway, unsure how to begin. "Hey," he said softly, his voice cracking. Claire looked up, her eyes meeting his. "Hey, Ethan started, then stopped, running a hand through his hair. "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry." Claire set her phone aside, her expression guarded. "For what?" "For everything," Ethan said, stepping into the room. "For shutting you out. For lying. He sighed, "for letting things get this bad." Claire crossed her arms, her gaze steady. "Do you even understand why things got this bad?" Ethan nodded slowly. "Because I didn't face the problems in my real life. I ran away into a fantasy instead." Claire leaned forward, her voice firm but not unkind. "It wasn't just the game, Ethan. You stopped trying with me. You stopped caring about us. The game was just a symptom of something bigger." Ethan swallowed hard, her words cutting through him. "I know, and I want to fix it. I don't know if I can, but I want to try." Claire studied him for a long moment before nodding. "Then let's start now." That evening, Ethan made a decision. He logged into Endless Horizons one final time. Not to play, but to say goodbye. His avatar, Aiden, stood in the Whispering Glade, the place where so much of his life in the game had unfolded. Claire joined him as Kira, her presence beside him both comforting and bittersweet. "So this is it," she said, breaking the silence. "Yeah," Ethan replied. I don't know how to let go." Claire placed a virtual hand on his shoulder, her voice gentle. "You don't have to let go of everything. The memories, the lessons, they'll stay with you. But this world, it's not real, Ethan. What's real is out there." Ethan nodded, her words sinking in. Together, they walked to the nearest logout point, the shimmering portal glowing faintly in the moonlight. As Aiden turned to face Kira, Ethan hesitated. "Thank you," he said, "for not giving up on me." Claire smiled. "Just don't make me regret it." With a deep breath, Ethan stepped through the portal, leaving Endless Horizons behind. The next morning, Ethan boxed up his VR headset and packed it away in the closet. It was a small gesture, but it felt monumental. Claire watched him from the doorway, her expression softening. "That's a good start," she said. "I'm serious about this," Ethan replied, turning to her. "About us." Claire nodded, her voice quiet. "I hope so." In the weeks that followed, Ethan and Claire began rebuilding their relationship. It wasn't easy. There were arguments, tears, and moments of doubt, but for the first time in years, they were truly communicating. They went on walks, shared meals without distractions, and even laughed together again. But the scars of Ethan's betrayal lingered, and Claire struggled with her own doubts. Could she fully trust him again? Could they ever go back to the way things were? One evening, Claire received an unexpected message from Marcus. "Marcus Rogue, hope you're doing okay. Just thought you'd want to know. Celine's account was banned. Nightshade, too. Looks like justice caught up with them." Claire stared at the message, a mixture of relief and unease washing over her. While Celine was no longer a threat, the damage she had caused couldn't be undone. "Kira, thanks for letting me know. And for everything. Anytime. Stay out of trouble, Kira." Claire smiled faintly, closing the chat window. Marcus had been an unlikely ally, but his help had been invaluable. One night, as Ethan and Claire sat on the couch watching a movie, Ethan reached for her hand. "Claire," he said softly. "Yeah?" "I don't think I ever told you why I started playing that game." Claire turned to him, her brow furrowing. "Why did you?" Ethan hesitated, then said, "I felt like I was losing myself. At work, I'm just another cog in the machine. At home, I felt invisible. Like I wasn't enough for you anymore. Claire's heart ached at his words. Ethan, you've always been enough. But I felt invisible too. You shut me out when I tried to reach you. I know, Ethan said, his voice thick with emotion. And I hate that I made you feel that way. I didn't know how to talk about it. Claire squeezed his hand. We're talking now. That's what matters. Ethan nodded, his grip on her hand tightening. I want to be better. For you. For us. Months later, Ethan and Claire found themselves in a much better place. Their relationship wasn't perfect, but it was stronger than it had been in years. They'd learned to trust each other again, to lean on each other instead of running away. And though Endless Horizons was a chapter of their lives they'd both left behind, its lessons stayed with them. The importance of honesty, communication, and choosing reality over fantasy. As they sat together on their porch, watching the sunset, Ethan smiled. You know, for all the mistakes I made, one good thing came out of that game. What's that? Claire asked, tilting her head. I realized how much I need you, Ethan said. And how much I don't want to lose you. Claire smiled, leaning her head on his shoulder. You're not going to lose me, Ethan. Just keep showing up. And for the first time in a long time, Ethan felt like he truly could.